Korvac sat on the stone bench, enjoying the midday sun on his hide. Hot days like this helped him feel just a little younger than his 100 cycles. He looked up at the statue that never failed to move him. He remembers the day it was erected, 60 cycles ago. The excited chattering of the next class drifted down the hall to him. This was his favourite part of the history class he taught. To most, it was just history, something that happened before their time. But to him, it was still alive in both his hearts. "Come in and take a seat, hatchlings." Raising his voice to be heard over the noise 30 hatchlings could make, Kvork sometimes got irritated by how difficult it could be to quiet 30 students who were barely 10 cycles old. But then he remembered his childhood and how difficult it was. He preferred the happy chatter of the hatchlings over the fear and hopelessness when he was their age. "Quiet down, hatchlings," looking sternly at them. "So for today's lesson, I brought you to one of our people's most sacred monuments." He began to stroll to the statue before pointing at it. "Who can tell me what this statue depicts?" Kornak, picking a student from the back row. Kornak stood. "It's a human, Honored Elder." Korvac nodded in approval. "Very good, Kornak. You may be seated. And who can tell me about the humans?" His arms clasped behind his back as he turned to look at them. "Rudjok." Rudjok rose and confidently stated, "They are aliens, but my sire calls them just a myth, a legend." Korvac looked out at the other students. "How many of you agree that humans are a myth?" Almost every claw shut up. Korvac shook his head and thought to himself, less than 90 cycles for real events to become a myth. "That is incorrect, Rudjok. Your sire is quite wrong." Turning to look up with reverence. "I was there when the humans appeared to us. Saved us." An excited buzz coursed through the class. Several students asked questions at the same time. "Really? Were humans as tall as the statue? Where are they now? Did you meet any?" Korvac held up a claw to quiet them. "Yes, I was there when the humans came." He took a moment to gather his thoughts. "I wasn't much older than you are now when we still lived on Quarthen." Another excited buzz at the mention of their former homeworld. The young grew up on tales of life before they had to leave the planet. To the young, it was so long ago that they forgot some Quexians were still alive from that time. Korvac stood in front of them. "There was no Quexian Republic then, and we'd only recently left our world for the stars. We'd established a few colonies on our moons, but couldn't even explore our entire system yet. My sire was a member of the ruling Council of Elders." Korvac still felt proud of his sire. "We sent messages to the stars, wondering if we were alone. We made first contact with the Chimerians, and from them, we learned of many other races. Small groups of aliens came to trade and welcome us to the galactic community, one of which was the humans. Unlike most aliens, they were fair in their dealings with us. It was one of their laws when it came to interacting with those races new to the stars." Korvac continued. "We traded for new technology, including new tools to examine our system and to explore our world. It was one of these new devices that warned us of the danger building inside our second moon, Badarzek." As always, a rush of memories came to Korvac when he taught this lesson. "What was the danger?" one of the students exclaimed. Korvac hid a smile as he replied, "I will tell you in a moment. Be patient." Pressure was building to an extremely high level, and there was concern it would endanger our science outpost there. Korvac took a breath. "We didn't think big enough, that it would crack our moon and send chunks of it to our homeworld." At first, our scientists just studied the changes, but things changed once they saw the fault lines beginning to widen, and then the moonquakes became more frequent, more intense. They sent messages to scientists of various races, and they warned us that it was just a matter of subcycles before it cracked wide open, and then they told us it would most likely destroy our planet when the huge chunks hit the surface. Our other moon couldn't sustain life. It was just another outpost, Korvac said. Korvac remembered the looks on the faces of the adults, the hushed whispers and discussions about what to do. We were still new to space and had very few ships capable of leaving our system. We needed help if we were to survive. Messages were sent to all the races we'd met. He still remembered his sire's anger, but they either ignored us or offered to sell or rent their ships for an exorbitant amount. A few offered us shelter, but in return, we'd be like slaves for them. Korvac still loathed the Kesnet for their so-called offer. We'd just about given up on help from other races and made plans to get as many out as possible. Korvac enjoyed how engrossed the students were in his tale. We had no idea that someone answered our call, but the humans did. A massive fleet arrived, thousands of ships of all sizes. Warships, transports, luxury liners, cargo haulers, and shuttles by the hundreds to move us from the planet to the ships. The humans apologized for taking so long to get there. My sire calculated how long it took to travel from Quarthen to the humans' home system. They left less than a rotation after they got our message. Looking at his students' faces, he remembered having that same look of astonishment. Korvac continued. Now, humans were known to be efficient, but the level of their preparation was beyond belief. They knew just how many of our people could fit per ship, with our most necessary possessions. Teams of humans worked with our people to dismantle our most important buildings. Temples, factories, space launching facilities, monuments, schools, and others were just torn down for the material. Samples of native flora, and as much fauna as they could safely catch, were taken aboard explorer ships set up to do just that. Surprisingly, they managed to get samples of almost all flora and large numbers of wild fauna. All the wild animals you see in the parks, and wild, are from our home planet. It still left Korvac in awe at just how much they did in such a short time. They'd even completely evacuated and removed our outposts on both moons, and extracted large amounts of our resources for our use in rebuilding. Korvac smiled as he teased the students. Remember that when you complain it takes too long to clean your dens. Korvac carried on with the tale. They did this without stopping for 10 rotations. They took us to a planet they'd been terraforming for their use, but hadn't occupied yet. We got another surprise when we landed, and found another large group of humans had been putting up temporary shelters for us. Holes had been dug to transfer the water from our planet, to save on the time it can take to have enough for all of us and our animals. Until the moisture processes can supply enough to create all the lakes, and some of the rivers you see now. With this world being much closer to Quarthen, they were then able to make multiple trips back and forth. All of our people, except the ones that stayed to help, were transferred here in less than 8 rotations on Quarthen. That would be 6 rotations here. My sire was one of the volunteers, and told me they worked until almost the last minute before it happened. Korvac vividly remembers the sorrow in his sire's voice as he described the death of our world. I was with my sire when the Council of Elders met with the humans that had been in charge of the evacuation. Korvac continued. The Elders asked how they should repay the humans for their help, and one of them made a joke. He said, it was traditional to repay someone with pizza and beer when they help you move. We were confused, but all the humans laughed at that. Korvac followed up by explaining it was a joke. They asked for nothing but our friendship, and to not be like the races that refused or tried to take advantage of us. Humans stayed 2 cycles to help us get our civilization in order again. Cities were built, flora planted, and then wild fauna released, Korvac said. They even helped us establish and build a fleet of our ships. Not just military, but civilian and exploration vessels. Our warships are only slightly modified from the designs the humans gave us. Korvac finished with, "Humans are real, and we owe them a great debt." The students began talking excitedly about the lessons, before one student raised a claw. "Yes, Haytok." Korvac was sure what the question would be. They always asked eventually. "Honored Elder, if the humans are real, then why haven't we seen them?" Haytok queried. "They were betrayed," Korvac stated simply. Many of his students gave an audible gasp at this statement. Several students spoke up with questions that all amounted to the same thing: who betrayed them and how. "That will be fully explained at a later date, but to summarize..." Korvac took a sip from the container of water, where he kept it on his belt. 29 cycles after we arrived in this world, a new race entered our galaxy. They were almost as malevolent as they were powerful, and they announced their arrival by destroying 8 colonies from various races, Korvac said. The only reply they gave to calls sent to them was simply, "Submit or die." But that was a lie. Korvac took another sip. He always needed fluids by the end of the lessons, from all the talking. He continued. A Berithian colony surrendered to them, and they still destroyed it. They enslaved some of the people, but they exterminated others in horrific manners. An object lesson, they said. The humans were furious. The Berithians were a peaceful people, and not very numerous, Korvac said. I asked one why they reacted that way, and he replied, "We don't like bullies, especially when they target our friends." So the humans called for war against the new race. We didn't even know their name. Korvac shook his head in disgust. The Great Council argued over it. Some assumed they would only attack the lesser races and leave them be. Others wanted to keep trying the diplomatic route. Others agreed, but would only protect their space. Ourselves and over a half-dozen smaller races answered the humans' call, but we could only muster 60 real warships between us. Where the human ambassador had raged at the more powerful races, he warmly welcomed us to join the effort. The only one of the most powerful races, the Kithranka, promised support, but being on the other side of the galaxy, it would take some time to get a fleet to human space. It was at this point that the human ambassador shamed the rest of the council by saying they didn't need them, they'd just be in the way, and promptly exited the chambers with us joining him. Korvac kept on with the story. The Kithranka ambassador barely said anything before he nodded at us and left to contact his government. The human ambassador thanked us for being loyal friends and got us in contact with their fleet command. Another student raised a claw. Then what? Did we fight? Korvac proudly replied, Yes, we did. I was serving on one of our cruisers and made sure I got to go help our friends. The humans only requested 5 ships from each of us. They didn't want us defenseless. So we joined with the humans' armada. It was far larger than the one that saved us, and it was all warships. I was told there were over 100,000 ships of various sizes, from massive carriers to small starfighters. But the enemy brought more and bigger ships. Images of the chaos of battle filled Korvac's head before he continued. The humans had us in reserve to counter their flank attack. I'd never even heard of a battle this massive, let alone seen. Korvac's heart began beating faster as he remembered the terror and exhilaration of the fight. The humans drove straight into the center of the enemy's formation. It was so chaotic that it was almost impossible to tell friend from foe. Another student spoke up.
But what about you and our ships?
Korvac continued. We did as asked, and attacked any ships that got around the flanks, mostly fighters and destroyers, but we did have to gang up on a large cruiser too. And after 3/4 of a rotation, the battle was over. Korvac looked at each student. Only a few of the enemy escaped, and none of their capital ships, but the humans paid a very heavy price for victory. 80% of their fleet was destroyed, and the rest heavily damaged. All but a dozen capital ships were floating wrecks. Our little squad only lost 3 ships destroyed, with the rest damaged in one way or the other. The human casualties were in the millions, dead, wounded, or missing. Korvac looked at the scars on his right arm from an exploding console after a massive hit, and the next 2 rotations were spent rescuing survivors from wrecks and sending wounded to hospitals all over their space, including our wounded. Unlike other races, the humans didn't differentiate in treating their wounded and their allies. Korvac continued. Aside from the Zanfrex, we went to the same hospitals as their wounded. The Zanfrex could only go on a special hospital ship that would take them home since their biology made it difficult to treat in a standard human med facility, but the humans treated them as a priority to get home. A small Kith-Ranker fleet arrived a rotation after the battle. Only 25 smaller ships that had been on convoy duty were much closer than the home fleets. They were sent ahead of the others.
Is that how they were betrayed? That the others didn't show up?
A student named Polka asked. No. The enemy did not take their defeat lightly, and they launched antimatter torpedoes into the stars of systems inhabited by human colonies. Even the humans' home system was targeted, and their cradle world was destroyed. Korvac replied, unable to keep the sadness from his voice. The betrayal came from one of the races on the council, either scared of the enemy or angry at the humans that relayed the location of all the humans' major colonies. Another student, Zenach, asked,
Who did that?
Korvac answered, We don't know, but since the location of one of the destroyed human military bases was known only to less than a dozen races, someone gave it up.
So that killed all the humans?
Korvac didn't see which student asked. No. Less than 1 million humans survived, on a few minor colonies and stations, Korvac continued. They spent the next 10 cycles rebuilding their military and constructing 5 massive motherships. The humans wanted revenge, and they were going to find the enemy's space and finish what they started. Korvac took another sip. And so all but a few humans left this galaxy to take war to the enemy. The ones that stayed all died eventually, so we built this statue to remember them and their friendship with us, Korvac finished. And now, my inquisitive little hatchlings, the lesson is over, and it's time to go home.